Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thanks, everybody, for coming out to the near the closing round in the series of this year's Virginia Tech Carilion Research Institute Distinguished Public Lecture Series. We have one more in this season that you should see in the program that I hope everybody picked up coming up in a few weeks. The next speaker in the series is Dr. Eldar Shafir, who will be here on May the 17th. And then we'll be rolling into the fall series, again, taking a little bit of a hiatus over the summer period. So it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Thanks to all of you coming out on such a beautiful day, but you won't be disappointed. Dr. Mary Wooley is the president and CEO of Research America. She has been recognized for her contributions in many, many ways. She's an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine, which was formerly the Institute of Medicine of the National Academies of Sciences. She's received recognition from that august organization for her many contributions, including the Yarmolinsky Medal for her distinguished contributions to the mission of the Academy over a significant period. In addition, she has served several terms on the National Academy boards for a variety of missions relating to higher education and workforce development. And she has been recognized by numerous organizations for her contributions. The one I like the best that I think really sums it up is the Public Broadcasting System recognized her as an unsung heroine. And I think that's very true in many respects. Mary works behind the scenes effectively, talking to leaders across the country in states, not just in Washington, but gets outside of the Beltway. My guess is she's been to virtually every medical center in the United States, maybe not all. I know it's her first visit here, so she can check that one off as well. Originally, Mary came from Chicago. She did her undergraduate work at Stanford University and then did a master's degree at San Francisco State. She worked as a project director early on in a large NIH-funded trial studying multiple risk factor interventions. And then she became an administrator at the Medical Research Institute in San Francisco, became the executive director and CEO of Research America in 1990. So she's been in that leadership position for a few years now. And believe me, the contributions and the work have not diminished. If anything, they've accelerated. Many of you, I think, are fortunate enough by being affiliated with Virginia Tech to get access to the letters and emails that Mary sends out on behalf of biomedical and health science research and science and education. And I think you can see not only she's extremely articulate, but a very effective voice that rallies the spirit of the country around the important areas of science, medicine, and education, and having real support for those things. I want to say I've known Mary for somewhere between 20 and 25 years. I can't remember exactly when. I met her when I was at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and I was attending some events that the Association of American Medical Colleges was doing, and we had a Hill lobbying day, I believe. We'd go meet with congressmen and women and their staffs, and she was very much involved in that. And I remember distinctly listening to her speak and realizing something. It was an epiphany for me. I grew up and trained as a scientist. You know, we're mostly nerds. We're sitting around talking about data and how great the things we're doing. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is the missing part of the equation. Somebody who can, in an articulate and effective voice, who understands the science, but also, more importantly, understands the impact on all of us and our families and generations to come, who can make that case for us. Nowadays, we expect all our trainees and students to do that same thing. You all learn about doing elevator pitches and so forth, and I think a big part of what Mary does is help us to make sure we train the next generation to do that. But she is, without a doubt, the most effective voice on behalf of the biomedical research enterprise that I've ever heard, and we are all much better for her presence. So please join me in thanking Mary Wooley for joining us.
Wow, Mike, a generous and sort of intimidating introduction. But this is really, what I have to say is really about all of you and the ways that we share aspirations for better health, quality of life, a stronger educational environment in this nation and across the world, and finding ways, in addition to conducting science, world-class science here at VTC, finding other ways to help assure the kind of outcomes that we really do all want for ourselves, for our family members, for our nation, for the world. So I hope that I can give you some ideas of things that you can do. I hope I'll stimulate some of your thinking. I will show you some data, not the kind you're used to, probably, but because you're scientists, I know you want to see some. And I also hope that I'll stimulate some thinking that you'll push back on. You know, you'll tell me you don't agree or you see things differently, because that'll make me smarter and my colleagues as well, and ultimately our work. So we at Research America are fortunate at this time to have some funding support from the Kavli Foundation, which you may or may not know about. They have for some time now been giving awards, very generous awards, to members of the science community across the sciences, not only biomedical, but more recently they have stepped up in work on increasing public understanding and in science communication, and that's kind of where we fit in. So I wanted to make sure that you knew about the foundation. We took a look, my colleagues and I, at some of the things that you're doing to engage your own community, which is a key way that you can touch hearts and minds beyond the science community. It's just like the people in your neighborhood. Some of the people I'm sure in this room are not scientists by training, but are very interested in and are in fact stakeholders in one way or another of the science enterprise. And it takes that outreach to the community to really help make that as rich as possible, enrich it and solidify it. But you're doing this, and I applaud you for it. And your leadership in that regard, Mike, really matters. So when we talk about winning hearts and minds, we talk about advocacy. And that's not the same thing as lobbying. It can be the same thing, and we do some lobbying, to be sure. But advocacy is really making the case. It's making the case for something that you profoundly, deeply are passionate about and hope that others can share your passion and will help support. That's what advocacy is. And it's not something that other people actually can do for you anywhere near as effectively as you can do for yourself. And you add to that the power of numbers in the political realm, and that's where we get real change, real movement as a society in, ultimately, we hope, because that's our work, supporting science. Our mission is, in fact, to make research for health a higher priority in this country, a much higher priority. And we try a lot of different ways to make that happen. We're proud of the fact that we don't do the same thing we were doing in 1989 or 90 when we first got started. We've got some new ideas, thank goodness, and new blood in the advocacy arena. But not everything works. And that's okay too. It's kind of like science at the bench or in the clinic. Not everything works. But we're not by any means shy of trying new things. And so I urge you to challenge us. We have been around for 29 years. We have a broad alliance, you can read about it here, and some sister organizations in other parts of the world officially, as well as many others whom we exchange information with regularly, because that's how we get some of our greatest ideas, from other people, other organizations. We have a fantastic board, 5 former members of Congress who are very active as volunteers, working to persuade their former colleagues who are still on Capitol Hill to be more supportive in terms of stronger policies and more funding for science, including science broadly, not only medical and health research, because we all do need to be thriving together as well as working together. Former members, former heads of federal agencies, Elias Zerhouni, the former head of the NIH, Mark McClellan, the former head of the FDA, are also on our board, along with wonderful leaders from among our stakeholder and member organizations. This is the most recent advertisement that we initiated in the Washington area, the immediate Capital Beltway area. On social media, and actually also in publications, including the local Wall Street Journal, for several months in the late part of the fall and into January, February, trying to drive the message that funding science is essential, opens a world of possibilities, but in order to do that, we had to raise the budget caps. This isn't something that people are talking about over kitchen tables here in Roanoke or in Austin, Texas, or in Nebraska or Wyoming. There's no need for a national campaign about this. It was being discussed daily, hourly, for months in Washington, in the Capitol, in the other parts of the structures of our governing bodies, trying to wrestle with, could we, should we, increase the limitations of money that could be spent overall for all interest, all things that are funded by the government. By keeping the cap on, it was a fool's errand to try to get more money for medical research. The cap was keeping everybody down, so we had to work on the cap. So it's background, but it was a successful campaign along with the work that other people did, and those caps were raised. There's other ways that we point to that advocacy works that are better known, if you will, and are part of the history of funding for science in particular, but also the policy framework. And a number of these are listed here. In talking earlier today with Mike Fox, I realized that there should be something else on this list, which is the work that was an outpouring of advocacy, especially from young scientists, but all scientists of all ages, to be sure that the new tax bill that was passed in February did not penalize graduate students. That was extraordinary outpouring. So that really should be on this list too. We were delighted to be part of that. Not everything is successful when we're advocating for it, but we like to point at the reality that advocacy does work. Right now, we're in a good place with an asterisk on it. The asterisk actually doesn't even make this because it's this slide, because it's so new. But the very good news is that on March 23rd, the budget caps having been raised in February, and February 8th or 9th, on March 23rd, the Congress passes amazing omnibus bill, and the president signed it. And it included an extraordinary increase for NIH, the largest percentage-wise as well as dollars ever for NIH, and increases for other federal health and research agencies that we have a special focus on. So that is, a cause for celebration. The asterisk is that there's now rumblings, just in the last few days, that there will be an effort to give a haircut to all these agencies and other things funded by your tax dollars in order to make a political point that this huge new expenditure of money is really too much, and the president and allies are going to cut that back through a rescission, so-called, that's made possible by a piece of legislation that passed in 1974. We're watching that carefully. But the message is no rescission. If you're on Twitter right now, at Donald Trump, real Donald Trump, at leader GOP, at your member of Congress, no rescission, hashtag no rescission. Meanwhile, the fiscal 19 budget is now being negotiated, and these are the, quote, asks that we and other advocates for these agencies are making. Some of them, but percentage-wise, are quite large, but well justified in terms of the mission these agencies are asked to consider and to take on for all of us. The FDA, for example, responsible for 25% of all consumer dollars spent in the nation, responsible for them being safely spent on products that are safe and well regulated and inspected. The budget of the FDA is less than Montgomery County, where it's located, their county budget for education. The FDA does not have a big budget, is the point. So those are our asks, as I say. Now, why would taxpayers and their elected representatives spend more money on science? You know, you have to have some arguments to make beyond just give us more than we had last year or the year before that. What are the arguments that resonate? Well, there always are health arguments. These are some factoids pulled from the United Health Foundation's America's Health Ranking. Some of them seem to conflict with each other, which I think is quite intriguing, that a strength in Virginia is low drug death rate compared to other states. But the challenge is that drug deaths are going up. And of course, that's happening everywhere. Significant challenge. And I know that there are people here working on that very issue. And there's others here, but it's a rich resource for leveraging state-specific issues that are of concern to legislators and policymakers. So Virginia ranks 19th among states in terms of its health ranking. It's pretty good, I think. Other arguments that resonate, and I've heard about this aspect of this institution right here in Roanoke, its economic benefit. In talking to a reporter for the Roanoke Times yesterday, volunteered to me that there was increasing awareness in the community, all across the community, of the economic impact of this institution. I have never heard that, and Mike is right. I've been in a lot of academic medical centers around this country and talked to a lot of people in local media. That's amazing to hear, that recognition. And there's room for much more, and you're taking advantage of that. You're building it out, I know. So while these are statewide statistics, you've got your own, and those are wonderful ammunition, if you will, arguments, case to make to policymakers. This is another, we think, quite fine series of publications. Each state has an equivalent publication to use to talk to leaders in industry, leaders in the political structure, leaders in education, and you can understand why this would have such a high impact. Another kind of argument, which we find quite persuasive, the feedback is to us that it's persuasive, is comparing your state to other states. And choosing which ones to compare to varies a good deal, and you might want to compare to one state or not, and you might not think that these states are like you. The reason we put these up here, New Jersey and North Carolina, is the population rank that's close to equivalent. Look at the differences in how these approximately same population states rank in their ability to pull in, if you will, to attract funding from NIH, CDC, you can read the rest, and how they rank in their ability to do so. So from this, I would say Virginia has quite a ways to go to realize its potential, if you will. There's more here for Virginia in terms of attracting more dollars for science. The brain power is here. We just stipulate that the brain power is there in every state. The brain power is there. So some combination in a state like North Carolina, where it was decided years ago by the state to invest heavily in attracting the life science industry and education in the life sciences. You can see the difference that's made for them for decades, In other states, in New Jersey, you would think would do a lot better than it is, but it's not. It's stymied by a lot of problems and issues. We're not going to talk about New Jersey today, but Virginia, you know, the opportunities here, I think, are extraordinary, and just the optics of what's happened in Roanoke makes it obvious that you can improve here. And your state legislature, your governor, and your congressional delegation will get that immediately and be proud of accomplishment as you move up in rankings. So other arguments, one that we know was highly effective in accomplishing those stunning increases that just happened on March 23rd was the argument that China and other nations are going to overtake the US if we don't do a better job of investing in R&D. And you can see some of them, China is I think 13th in this ranking and moving up fast, and in fact has already overtaken the US in publications, the total number of science publications, for what that's worth. But there's a lot of different markers, and there's awareness, even though we've been telling that story and others have, the story about China, for at least a decade. It didn't really catch on until this year. And I think that's partly because China has been in the news for so many other reasons anyway. The more people are paying attention, and that means their elected representatives are paying attention. So this is a very strong argument, not because we don't want China to succeed, by the way, but because we don't want to come in second, third, or last, because we don't want to do that in this country on anything, right? Back to NIH briefly, and looking forward, there's a couple of points to be made here. One, by looking at the CPI adjusted line here, that you can see for all the excitement of, and there should be excitement, of the recent $3 billion addition, NIH's budget has really been flatlined for a long time in terms of purchasing power, a long time. And it's going to take a while to get it back on the kind of track it was on in the late 90s, early parts of the 2000s. And the reason to do that is not just to grow it for the sake of growth, of course, but it's so that many more young scientists will be encouraged to continue their career, to get into science to begin with, so that more proposals, worthy proposals, get funded instead of left on the cutting room floor, and ultimately so that we can defeat Alzheimer's and autism and the opioid epidemic, and the list goes on. That's why, not just growth for growth's sake. The president's budget is, a further chilling aspect here. It was even worse in 2019 in terms of, 2018, his proposed budget. So we don't have the administration there yet in terms of on board with growing our funding, our opportunity. We have the opportunity, funding the opportunity in science in this country, but we and others are working on that as well. So how do we do this? Our former chair, who was in the Congress at the time and was responsible in the House for doubling the NIH budget in 5 years, John Porter, often in speaking to science groups says what you read here, that you can change the image of things to come. We don't have to accept that kind of budget that the president outlined or the slow growth of a decade. But it takes getting up off your hands and not sitting on your hands and reaching out to Congress. It's, and some of you I know are doing that. The kind of data I'm going to show you, this is the first one of a few snippets from our work, because we commission public opinion polls. They're the same kind that members of Congress and those who want to be in the Congress or in the state legislature or in any kind of public office commission. They're the same kind of polls. They are of the same quick snapshot level of public attitude, capturing public attitudes. They're extremely valuable over time. You can see changes, trend changes, and we've got 25 plus years of data. So you should always, when you look at these kinds of surveys or any kind of public opinion survey, you have to take my word for it without me going through a lot of slides on all of our methodology, but we have solid sample sizes, 1,000 adults nationally typically. The way to read these is always to combine the very important and somewhat important. You combine those, and you always combine not too important and not at all important, because research has shown that that's the way a lot of people respond to public opinion surveys, is to go toward the middle rather than extremes. But they're either in favor of something or against it. And asking just yes, no, or I don't know is not going to give you an accurate representation. So this is overwhelming. You can say that it's important, the public says it's important for scientists to inform elected officials about their research and its impact on society, and important to inform the public, inform the taxpayer, be accountable. We hear this over and over and over again from members of Congress and their staffers. They say, we never hear, except, occasionally in our office in Washington, but rarely home in the district, rarely, from scientists in ways that the public understands, and then the public comes to us, the non-science public comes to us and says, do more for science. It's important in our district, in our state. This one, I think, is terrific information. It shows how strongly the public says it supports having science inform public policies. And this does not differ by political affiliation, except that independents are a little less likely to say so. And that's because independents, in general, are less likely to be supportive of government. That's the way to understand this. But here we see that people expect science to be informing policies. Now I ask you, is that really what's happening? Not so much, not so much. And not just policies in general, but a whole range of public policies. Remember to combine strongly agree and somewhat agree. See, this is just overwhelming. That there's the public believes there's a place for science in informing policy. So if ever you think, well, that's not what people think, or it may not be what's happening, it is what people expect to happen. And it should be an empowering message to the science community. We also hear, and there's an interesting increase over a very short amount of time, and we don't usually see that in the polls we commission. An interesting increase in the percentage who say that it's important that elected officials listen to advice from scientists. So this is also, I think, quite compelling. You may think the American public is kind of tuned out generally. Not so much so. Wants to get more science into policymaking, wants elected officials to listen to scientists. Our current chairman, former governor, former congressman Mike Castle, who was a true hero in protecting embryonic stem cell research when he was in the Congress, and still is absolutely committed to that issue among many others, has made it clear in a piece he did with the Society for Neuroscience, the importance it was for him to listen to the case from scientists. This is a moderate Republican, as, by the way, is John Porter. John Porter has a building named for him at NIH. So do the others that you see here of both parties, which I think is the number one thing to take away from this slide, is there is historically and currently, bipartisan support for the NIH. And it's revealed in the names on buildings there. Another thing to notice is that there's a lot of buildings left to name and some space to build new buildings. So I have said to Francis Collins, and he just, kind of laughs, but I think it's true, that it's time to be planning for 2 new buildings. Because we have extraordinary leaders right now in the Congress for NIH, legacy leaders It's in their blood, in every speech they give, the importance of medical research. We haven't seen this for over a decade, 15 years, from people in equivalent positions, their predecessors in these key committee chairs. The really, really good news here is not only are they great and they're not going to stop, if an election, this one or another one, changes parties, the ranking member behind them, meaning from the other party, is equally strong. It's an extremely fortuitous, not all within our control, of course, a fortuitous situation. But it's not something we can take for granted will always continue. In fact, we've seen what happens, without going into all the grisly history, when there isn't strong support from people in these two chairs. So someday soon, I intend to be, I trust I will be at the opening of those buildings at NIH. But now, time to get you into this a little bit more. Imagine that you're at Starbucks or your favorite coffee emporium on a weekend in the community where you vote. Might be right here in Roanoke, or it might be some other part of the country. But that's where I want you to picture yourself. So your member of Congress comes in on the same errand, getting a cup of coffee or whatever. So raise your hand if you recognize that person by sight. So congratulations, this is one of the larger percentages. And truly, I've been in many audiences where if I got one person to raise their hand, that was a lot. Here's the second question. Now raise your hand if your member of Congress recognizes you by sight. Semi-congratulations, you got a few. There are many audiences of scientists around the country where no hand goes up on that second question. And that is the definition of the problem that science typically has all around the country, meaning it's invisible. There is no local face on science in your community. Your member of Congress knows many people in the Starbucks, in your grocery store, in the movie theater, many, many people. They're voters. And he or she knows what you do, what those people in the community do on behalf of society, what their role is, what their business is, what their profession is, what their concerns are. The list goes on. They typically do not know scientists locally, or they may know one or two, but nothing like the number of real estate agents they know, bankers, business, small businessmen of all and women of all kind. You get the idea. Now, who are your members? I know that Mr. Goodlatte is technically your representative, because of the district, your representative, but he's retiring. But we also have, Mr. Griffith close by, and as I say, you may not vote in this immediate area. Your senators. Okay, that's typically much easier to say, oh yeah, I would recognize that person. So I'd ask you to think what your elected officials, these gentlemen or anybody else, what you have in common with them. You may disagree with them on 9/10 of their positions or agree with them on 9/10. Doesn't matter. You have something in common, which I urge you to think about. And that is they serve the public's interest. And that is a wonderful way to start a conversation with an elected official. You have to take the first step of knowing what that person looks like. If you're not visiting them in their office and it's obvious who they are, but to walk up to them in the community and thank them for their service, for being an elected official. It's a non-trivial challenge. And you can say, they'll say, what do you do? they'll say, well, I also serve the public's interest. Words to that effect. It's a great way to start a conversation. And you'll make friends, and it'll be memorable to that elected official. If the conversation proceeds, or if you're sitting in an office having a real meeting, you have to be prepared to make some asks after you say thank you. Now you want to take it to another level. What are you going to ask them to do? You might ask them to come visit you here on this campus. That would be appropriate. But there's also other specific things, and these are some examples. Because just saying thank you, while good and important, really isn't enough. You have to ask for their support because they do share your interests in serving the public. For these three, your two senators and Mr. Griffith, they're not even, and I put it that way on purpose, they're not even members of the NIH caucus, which is a low effort statement, something they can list on their website that they're a member of the NIH caucus because they believe in the National Institutes of Health, which many, many members of Congress do support. They would, if they're asked by enough constituents, trust me, they will sign up. So that's just one simple example of something to ask. This is an election year. It's incredibly important that members of the science community turn up at town halls and otherwise get engaged to make it clear that science is an issue that you expect, you the voter, expects a candidate and ultimately the one who's successful to be a leader for once they're in office. If a candidate has never spoken about science before they're elected, why would they start afterwards? It's not how they got there. It's not going to be who they pay attention to or an issue that they embrace. So this really is, whoa. I appreciate that endorsement. I know it's all for Abraham Lincoln, not for me, but this is my favorite statement about why it's important to pay attention to public sentiment. Because without it, nothing is possible. And I mentioned that we do surveys. Here is a little bit about the methodology. A few other things I'll go through very rapidly, just because I think they're interesting. And you'll find them interesting. Only a third of the US population, and it used to be closer to a half, but now only a third, say that the US will be a world leader in science and technology in just a short amount of time, a little over a year and a half. That's why that argument is so effective in the last omnibus. You know, breathing down our neck, we have China, et cetera. And we're falling. Meanwhile, the public strongly believes the US should be a global leader, not the only global leader, a global leader. It's important to assign a high priority to improving STEM education. That's not what's happening right now. But we know, and we know this with state-by-state surveys that we've done, it's true everywhere. People expect this, yet it is not happening. In fact, the opposite tends to be happening. It's been true for longer than Research America has existed because the National Science Board asked this question starting in 1982 with the exact, or very close to, same results. People support basic science. They may not know anything about it or even how to define it, but they're not knee-jerk opposed to it, nor has there been a decline in support among the public. More in the moment now, increased funding for research to better understand and combat the opioid addiction. Yes, let's do that. Let's desperately do that. There's a sizable not sure here. It's the first time we've asked this question, actually. We'll see how this changes over time. we track what other groups do in terms of public opinion surveying around public confidence, public trust, et cetera. And you see here in a Pew does a lot of work in this area, in Pew data, but we've seen it in our own too, replicating this almost exactly, that the military and medical scientists are the most trusted in this nation. This has been true for decades. Trust in everyone has gone down a little bit, but it's always the same rank order, which is quite interesting. So we're at the top science. You all are at the top here, along with the military. But despite that, I've already said that scientists are invisible in one way. There's other ways of measuring this. So we ask in a commission survey, can you give me the name of a living scientist? Doesn't have to be a biomedical scientist, just a living scientist. Okay, so you've got in your head what you think a general population sample might say, right? Well, here's what they say. Now, we know that Stephen Hawking just died, but leaving that aside for a moment, and I predict that for several years to come, he'll still be in the top. There are a number of deceased scientists in the not listed here, decimal dust level, and always have been. So we've been asking this question for over 20 years, and the percentage who say yes has not changed. Has not changed. Some of the names have changed. But this persistent invisibility problem has been with us quite a while. How about this one? Now we switch to medical and health research, just because that's really our territory. Can you give me the name of a place, any place, where medical or health research is conducted? Okay? It's not a hard question, right? Yeah, it is a hard question. 2/3 of the American population just say, no, I can't. I don't know. And then you can see for those third that say they can, you can see what they say. And this has changed very little, this listing. The percentage hasn't changed at all. The listing has changed a little tiny bit. I'm happy to tell you that over 20 years, NIH has moved up from 4% to 6%. Wow, of the people who, and there's separate questions that we've done just by describing the mission of several federal agencies and see if people can name what the agency is. And NIH has gone up a little bit in high single digits now. It's not very high. Whereas everybody knows by description what the IRS is, the FDA, and actually the CDC pretty much too, not NIH. Anyway, another one, I won't make you go through this, but this has obvious political importance. Only 1/4 of the public say, yes, medical research is conducted in all 50 states. What if only the members of Congress from 1/4 of the states cared about medical research? We would not be getting $3 billion increases, but that threat is underlying it to this day. There are many states in which there sure enough is very good medical research, but nobody's talking about it at home. Nobody's talking to their representatives. So the challenge here is increase the visibility. Everybody has to work on this a bit. And doing so is not about clobbering people with facts, taking out your data and just hammering them with it. It's about connecting to people around feelings, hearts before minds, if you will. You can read some of these points. But you don't have much chance. It's that elevator speech that you were talking about, Mike, earlier. You don't have much of a chance to break through with a new person in a new conversation to connect with them. And you will blow that chance if you do it with data, or even with the title of your field. Not the best way to start out. Serving the public's interest is way different and works. And to think about telling other people's story, why they want you to succeed, getting that frame in your head, rather than your story. You can get to your story, but start with thinking about what's their story, what's their reason for wanting to support you. And thinking about the inevitable doubters, the questions you get, and you get them, I am sure, I'm confident, every scientist in this room gets them, questions from people who know you well or hardly at all, expressing skepticism or doubt or just disdain for what you do. The secret, I think, and that we talk about all the time at Research America, is that if you hear what sounds like skepticism, label it as that proudly. Say, oh, you sound skeptical of this finding, which might not be yours, it could be somebody else's, about whether coffee is good or bad for you, or are stents good or bad, or I mean, there's this whole, every day, something else is being questioned. If people are sounding skeptical, you have something in common with them. That's how you're trained. You're trained to be skeptical. It's a whole nother way to have a conversation with a non-scientist who may be in, or getting close to, an attack mode, if not doubt. Try this out. A lot of people tell us it works very nicely for changing a conversation that's going in a bad direction. This makes that don't clobber people with data point, I think, but another one as well, which is social media matters. Not just because our president uses social media and is on Twitter, but because every member of Congress is. It really matters in ways that are positive and ways that we may deplore, but staying away from it is a mistake. But it is about storytelling and being dramatic. It's not about taking your long-form science paper and condensing it so somebody's going to click on it on Twitter. That's not going to happen, you know? It takes a different approach. One of the ways that we suggest people in the science community think about communicating is in a message frame that's called then, now, and imagine. It asks, and you can take it anything, any field you are in. You do have to make a little bit of a leap if you're in a very basic field to what difference your work might make someday. Those are keywords. But take people back to bad old days when we knew even less than we know now about aging or about diabetes, the killer that it was for so long, or HIV/AIDS, or there's just so many examples. Then talk about, thanks to science, investments in science that were made in this country and elsewhere, here's where we are today. And now, imagine where we can be. That's going to take continued investment. Then, now, and imagine. 3 phrases that you can build on. And really, it is the way that we're going to get to shared aspirational goals, finding the solutions to what ails us. Sometimes people talk about big money, and we're hearing a lot about that now because of concerns about the federal debt, given all the new money we're spending. So being able to put context, everyday context, around things like the NIH budget or sub-institutes of the NIH is very helpful. And these things come up every day. They can be, you know, if we hadn't just ended March Madness, could have used a basketball example. You can use baseball now if you want to use sports examples. Something that you hear day to day about the cost of X, and helping people say, wow, you know, we spend more money on cut flowers than we do on cancer research in this country. Yes, we do. Maybe they're not so anxious about spending a lot of money, or what seems like, and it is for most people, almost all people, quite a lot of money. It's not that much. We have to think about getting to the point that we have a nation that's worth defending. We've kind of slipped away from that thinking in past years, many would say, and I would agree. Of course, it's crucially important to defend this nation. Crucially important. Fighting against that is silly. Saying that we're spending too much money about it is politically very foolish, but it's also just not, doesn't make sense with American values. We do need to spend money on defense. We also need to spend money on education, on health, on science. And you can see the discrepancy here. A nation worth defending. Some other ways to talk about those big numbers. What are we spending via the National Institutes of Health? Or you could add all those health agencies together. What are we spending per person on every disease from Alzheimer's to Zika and everything in between every year? Not that much. Not that much. To find answers to challenges that every family is coping with every day, one way or another. We can afford it. The money is not the problem. It's the will. And getting away from the invisibility and the take it for granted and all the rest that we've gotten used to and lulled into in the science community over the past several decades. It's really crucial to talk to the non-science people that you know. Really crucial. And your elected officials are non-scientists, so I'm including them. But to build advocates, build champions, build people who are going to think about when they vote, are going to think whether they're voting in Congress or they're voting for a member of Congress or a member of the legislature of the Commonwealth. They're going to think about what is that person going to do for science without feeling that it's self-serving. Because I know sometimes that's a barrier. It's not self-serving. You're serving the public's interest just like they are. Own it, be proud of it, but do it right. No clobbering with data. Put a face on research, yours. And remember these 4 words, which I think really are the most powerful words. When someone, a stranger maybe, or maybe a relative who hasn't seen you for a long time and says, I can't really remember what you do. What is it again? Or a stranger on an airplane or something. What do you do? Instead of saying that you're a neurobiologist or a virologist or fill in the blank, something, say, I work for you. And see where the conversation goes. We get so much feedback about this, how positive it is, how it's changed a relationship in a family, extended family, let's say. Opened up the ability to talk about how your tax dollars goes to support my work and my colleagues all over the country, how the money flows, tax dollars to NIH, whatever. And it's really human and positive, and it's true that you work for the public's interest. And it's exciting, and it's fun and wonderful, and it's also what I do. I work for you. And it's the thrill of a lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Very inspiring and motivational in many ways. So we have some time for some questions or comments. Floor is open.
I hope so.
Hi, thank you. It was a great talk. Paul Spelling, I'm chair of medicine and infectious disease. You've talked about advocacy here and how to speak to people and about what we do and engage in conversation. A little off topic, but
Yep.
I'm interested in your views and whether your organization gets involved in any of this. What about those things that really have engaged the public at large, like gun issues and the fact that CDC doesn't allow gun research, or vaccines and how the population embraces or doesn't, climate change. for those scientists in the room who touch on these sorts of issues,
Right.
or things in the past, like HIV/AIDS, where there's a lot of action.
Yep.
What are your thoughts about how or how not to engage?
Yeah, well, I would say it is important to engage. Engage on the hard things, just like the easy things that we can get instant, because we're not engaging on either one right now very much in the science community. I spent the 1980s heading a research institute in San Francisco. What was going on in San Francisco in the 1980s? You know, AIDS. We did work on the virus, and it was quite controversial. So much so that the day arrived when I went with my family for brunch at the local bakery in Berkeley, where we live, and somebody came up to me and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "What are you talking about? Haven't you seen the paper today?" So there, you know, above the fold, San Francisco Examiner Chronicle article, supposed expose of the institute, the scientific institute that I was the CEO of. I knew nothing about this article, accusing us of isolating people with HIV/AIDS, not isolating the virus. Isolating people. This is a responsible newspaper, semi-responsible newspaper. And you can imagine what my day was like. I mean, that was the 80s. It was before cell phones and all this, so otherwise I would have certainly not had a moment's sleep the previous night. I certainly did not have any sleep the next several nights. Television, radio, all this, just total misunderstanding. But it was motivated by fear. People were desperately afraid. People who worked for us were afraid. People quit. We had all kinds of problems in those years. And that and animal research problems were together a real crucible for me personally and a lot of people I know in finding ways to talk about what you're doing and believe in as responsible science, taking responsibility for listening to people's concerns, both the rational and the irrational, and learning how to get better and better at tackling these issues. So these days, talking about gun violence research, we frame at Research America that as a public health challenge, which indeed it is. We have found ways to make other things that are inherently dangerous, automobiles, for example, something that is part of our culture and our life, and we've created licensure requirements, safety regulations, the list goes on, to make them more safe than they inherently are, in fact, dangerous. And there's plenty of ways to talk about gun violence research as a public health issue. I am gratified that the new Secretary of DHHS has explicitly talked about CDC doing, and the appropriateness of CDC doing gun violence research, as has the new director, Dr. Redfield. So that's very optimistic. It's been 20 years since we've heard that. And we'll see whether it really happens. You know, we still haven't gotten there yet. And the other issues as well, I don't want to take a lot of time going through them, but you can bet that we talk about them and we help other people having those conversations. And it's not always easy, and you're not always going to persuade everybody. We know that. But standing back or hiding from it is a big mistake.
Yeah, Chris.
I think something that comes up talking to community members and non-scientists about arguments for why they should support research is the idea of return on investment. And I'm curious as to what metrics your organization uses to show representatives or congressmen what they're getting back and how we can talk about that in our conversations about our science and what we're doing and use that as a tool to convince people it's important.
Right. It's a great question, thank you. And return on investment is, definitely, it's critical for, we all want that for every dollar of ours. We don't want to waste tax dollars in any way, shape, or form, but we want to not do more than not waste them. We want to get more than current dollar value. So one way is about advances in health. So depending on who you're talking to, knowing who you're talking to as you make the return on investment case is very important. So there's always health at some level. And it may not be your own work that has contributed to something that that individual cares about, that isn't something that they talk freely about, a disease in their family, and the fact that we're in much better place now than we were 20 years ago. That's the then, now, and imagine model. It could be economic benefit. And the reality that people want their children and their grandchildren to go into science careers. They know that those are going to be high value. They're going to make a good salary. They're going to make a difference to the community. We've got survey data that shows that people believe that. But you just kind of know it's true anyway. So that's the contribution to your community, to your state economically. For some people want to talk about global interests. Some people want to talk about building businesses based on basic science and how that contributes to the economy and ultimately to health or to other things that we value. So, but it comes back to who are you making that case to? There probably isn't a one general argument that's going to work or keep anybody listening to you for more than 5 seconds. I'll bet you're good at it. Yeah.
I'm glad you asked that question, so this is a good follow-up. Towards the end of your talk, you mentioned that this is a nationwide thing. And I think the director of Fermilab, there was a hearing the director of Fermilab was at, it was like 1960s, he was asking for money from the first particle accelerator. And he was asked by one of the senators, he was asked, what national security implications does this particle accelerator have? How does it help in the defense of the nation? And paraphrasing, his answer was something like, this has to do with why we're poets, why we do art. This has to do with human dignity. This has nothing to do with the defense of the nation, but to make the nation
Makes it a...
My question is, we talk about economic impact, we talk about return on investment a lot, and they're really useful for advocacy. But is the sentiment of enriching the human spirit, using science for that, is that sentiment still alive on the Hill? Is it alive in the country, do you think, based on the surveys that you've conducted?
In those words, it's hard. I can't say that we've asked, queried that in surveys, but I do think it's alive. Yes, indeed. And it's more like you're more likely to see it. I'm more likely to see it. Any of us in a one-on-one situation, where you know something in advance. Let's say because you did your homework. If you're talking to somebody on the Hill, what matters to them, what resonates with them, where they come from, what they've done, what their family's like. That's, there's a way science has made a difference in all of those areas and has made us a country to be proud of, and that you want your kids to grow up and live in. So I'm an optimist about that, but I don't think there's a memorize this line and use it all the time soundbite that goes with it.
Thank you, Mary, for coming. I actually used to work for Research America before med school, so it's been
Remind me, when was that? And tell me your name.
I did there in 2013.
Okay.
Anyway, so for the average voter, how important do you think the attitude towards science is from a candidate and how the voter decides it?
Almost non-existent. That's a problem. That's a problem. But we know from some work that a group called Science Counts has done, that we're involved with a relatively new organization whose mission is really to take the kinds of top-of-mind attitudinal information that we and others have put forward and dig a lot more deeply down and take a look at who it is that's the most enthusiastic, who it is that's most likely to take action, which is like, think about it when you vote, right? So we know who those people are at this point. It's about 17% of the American population. And those people are more likely to be located on the coasts. They're more likely to be more highly educated. They're across all ages. That's not a distinguishing characteristic. And there's other things that pretty much all fit together on the profile of these folks. And they're also typically people who vote. Usually, I mean, a lot of people don't vote at all, so they're really not who we're looking for. But ironically, I think, part of that 17% is the science community itself, wherever they are located. And they're not being active in at least expressing that a concern in voting is a given candidate's position or track record or intentions are positive about science. So we have a lot of work to do within the science community itself before we can, with a straight face, convince others, non-scientists, to do the heavy lifting for us. It's a little bit, I kid around about this, it's a little bit like having your child, or grandchild in my case, go out selling Girl Scout cookies, but you don't buy any yourself. That's convenient, right? So the challenge really, we think, the challenge is first and foremost to the science community. To get active, be outspoken, not worry about it appearing self-serving. There's a whole different way to frame that, and indeed to think about it. It's not a gimmick. It's profound. It's making a difference for a country that we care about.
I'm going to take the prerogative of myself standing here to ask you something. Sorry.
Yep.
I know I said last question, but you talked about caps and what's happened recently.
Yep.
I can't help but think, ever since I met you and got the message, when I meet with people on planes and other places and try to have these conversations, I oftentimes talk to businessmen and women, and they ask me the caps question in a different way. They often ask me, what would you give up? Tell me what I shouldn't fund because I should fund this. They're going to pit what I'm saying about medical research against education, the environment, and even within our own community, we get pitted, I think, against each other. Advocacy groups, we need more money for this versus this. What is your recommendation on how to deal with that?
Yeah, that is a classic trap. And that's a don't take the bait, for sure. So your job, if you're talking to a member of Congress or somebody sitting next to you on an airplane, businessman, is say, I don't see things that way. I believe that this country is capable of investing in a number of things simultaneously and to our benefit and credit. And it's the job of our elected representatives to weigh those priorities. That's appropriate. That's why we elect them. My job is to make the very best case for what I and my colleagues are contributing and what we need in terms of additional resources to do even more. That's my job here. I also believe in a number of other things that we could do better. It depends on who you're talking to. And if you're actually talking to that member of Congress or to their staffer, and you take that bait and say, oh, I've got an idea for you. I think you should defund these excess military planes or something. The person you were talking to is laughing inside, and you have not had any impact, trust me. So, right.
Okay. Please join me in thanking
Right.
Mary.
Thank you very much.